Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Yu, and our Seed Oil Survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters, and we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, aneighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you.
Canola oil is one of the healthiest cooking oils. When the canola seed arrives at the processing factory, it contains foreign material, mostly plant pieces. The seeds pass by a magnet. It removes any metal that may have fallen in during the journey from field to factory.
What are you eating right now? Are you eating self-hatred?
Well, we're back for another episode of the Seed Oil Survival podcast series that we've been doing. And this is the place to go for all the happening conversations, I would have to say, on the matter of linoleic acid. I've brought all of the Avengers together, even the late, great Ray Peat, right? In our big obesity panel we did.
That's true.
One of the last times we got to hear, and one of the first times, actually, that we got to hear, probably the first time that we got to hear Ray Peat interact with other independent researchers who are criticizing omega-6 and linoleic acid and all the, and that was really interesting because so many different worldviews with different theory. Every one of you guys, we had Peter Dobromilski, Tucker Goodrich, Kate Shanahan, you, and Ray P. And every one of you had a different explanation for how seed oil, linoleic acid causes obesity. Every one of you guys did.
Yeah. No, it's true.
And
we can all see that it happens, but it's complicated, right?
Right. But what a treat that was, and it is certainly a good thing to hear from different perspectives on this matter, which we think to be a very pressing issue in relating to metabolic dysfunction. Now, you've been on a journey that has separated you a little bit from some of the other folks in this exploration. You've rejected monounsaturated fat as something that should be probably avoided if you're dealing with obesity or metabolic dysfunction. Monounsaturated fat, for those who don't know, is something that you'd find primarily in things like olive oil. Conventional beef has a lot of what if you're eating store-bought regular beef, what's that going to have?
Well, beef has quite a bit of oleic acid, but it's balanced with stearic acid and palmitic acid, the other saturated fat. So I would say that beef is a kind of balanced source of oleic acid.
Yeah.
Olive oil is a very unbalanced source of oleic acid. It's almost pure, it's like 70% oleic acid. Right. Beef is more like 45 or 50% oleic acid. So it's high. And then something like butter. So dairy fat is down to like 20 to 25% oleic acid. So butter is still my go-to. If somebody says, what's the best fat? I would say butter, dairy fat, definitely. That's my favorite. It's the most saturated.
Even more than coconut oil?
Well, it's not as saturated as coconut oil, but coconut oil is kind of weird. It's made mostly of this 12 carbon long, this shorter kind of medium chain fat, they call it. Called lauric acid, and that thing activates PPAR alpha, which is a whole other discussion that we can have another time. It's not my favorite for that reason. I still think butter is the best.
Yeah.
Also, I live in dairy country, so there's a little bit of homerism there, but
support your people. So when you get to the latest on your journey. You've rejected, you kind of moved away from the keto carnivore space. You've moved away from, now you're trying the low fat approach to solving your obesity problem, right? Because
Yes.
you want to really figure this out permanently, right? You want to, I mean, not permanently. There's nothing permanent.
Right. Well, yes, I think we need some different approaches that work, and I'm what I felt like with keto and carnivore is I can do those diets and I can lose weight, but I don't feel like I'm fixed, right?
What do you
When
mean
I'm
by
on
that?
those,
Feel
well,
weird?
what I mean by that is I can go on those diets, and as soon as I cheat, as soon as I'm like, well, I want to start, I get bored. I mean, I like food, right? And I like whatever. I like pizza and popcorn like everyone else, right? And so if I'm on a keto diet and then I'm inevitably want to eat these things, potatoes and that I'm not in pasta that I'm not supposed to have, right? And so inevitably I'm always tempted to have those things, but as soon as I start eating them, the weight starts to creep back on, right? And so if that's the case, then I feel like, well, I didn't really fix myself. Like healthy people can eat pasta and potatoes, right? They're not fixed. They're just kind of avoiding the fact that they're not good at burning glucose for the moment, right? It's like I feel like keto and carnivore is a way of sort of avoiding your real problem, which is that you can't burn glucose, right? So you can do that forever, and some people can do that just fine.
Now, what about
Uh,
if some people were meant genetically to just be keto carnivorous? Like, I mean, and others are meant to be more carbohydrate burners. There's a lot of people
well,
have said that to me. Oh no, don't try to think if you do good on meat and fat, then that's what you should stick to. Your genetics are designed for that. Don't try to be a carb burner. You know what I mean?
right,
I've had-
right. So I like to look. There's a some old photos from like Yankee games, like World Series games you can find online from like the 40s and 50s and 60s. And like almost literally everyone in those photos is lean. You know what I mean? They're also dressed in suits and bowler caps at the baseball game, which you don't see much anymore. And I don't really want to wear a suit, so I'm glad that those days are over. But they're kind of fun to look at. But anyway, the point is though, you can look at these stadiums. They're almost all men, by the way. Women did not go to the game in 1960, apparently. But you can look at this whole sea of men, and there's none of them are obese. None of them. And I mean, there's a few guys that are more heavy set than others, but I think that there's a world where at one point we could almost all, like, there's always been obesity, right? There were that you can go back and look at the New York Times from 1920 and find stories about 600-pound guy.
It seems like they were thin until they were not, and when they were not, they were super big. Like William
Well,
Howard Taft, remember him?
those people
Yeah.
probably had some real genetic deficit, like you mean, such as like maybe they had a defect in their leptin receptor or something, some very real genetic deficit that that's uncommon. But I think in those cases, I think you can make that argument. But I think that for the majority of people, some certainly are better genetically at burning glucose than others. I think that's 100% true. But that doesn't mean that even if you're quote unquote bad at it, that doesn't mean that you can't do it. You just have to figure out the things that are holding you back.
Right, right. So, with that said, you've been, I don't want to get through the whole journey of all the different things you've tried. I mean, you can if you want to, but you've settled on this what you call the emergence diet, right? Which is, you called it originally a glass noodle diet. But why did you
Right,
change
right.
it to the emergence diet?
Well, so the emergence diet, what the term emergence means is, so in hibernating animals, as winter approaches, a hibernating animal makes a bunch of changes to become insulin resistant. And that helps it store fat for winter, right? And then through the winter, it burns the fat off. And then in the spring, it becomes insulin sensitive again, and it quote unquote emerges from torpor or emerges from this hibernating state. And so I use that analogy all the time, right? The analogy of torpor is that humans are essentially metabolically, we're the same as a hibernating animal, and we're, that's why we feel low energy. That's why we're insulin resistant. That's why we're fat, right? Because mammals have this program, and the program is designed to help us store fat for winter, right? Which, if you're a ground squirrel, it's your biological imperative to store fat for winter, or you will perish, right? And so biologically speaking, once your body has decided that winter is coming, you're gonna store fat, right? And so the question is, though, how do we emerge from this insulin resistant fat storing state, right? And so I've tried to, and so one of the things I talk about a lot is, I'm sure you've heard me talk about, is the idea of reductive stress and this thing called the NADH to NAD plus ratio. And these things all kind of just go back very simply, right? In layman's terms, these things are essentially too much energy in your mitochondria. Basically, what's happening, they call it energy toxicity, I think, is a term. There's there's all these different terms used sometimes in the literature, but the idea is that you sort of get bad at burning your fuel cleanly, and you start to get this buildup in your mitochondria of things like acetyl. So we break all our food down into this little two. So food is mostly carbon and hydrogen, right? And we break them all down into these little 2 carbon molecules called acetyl-CoA, and that's what we burn oxidatively in our mitochondria, is really acetyl-CoA, and it goes through this whole series of reactions, and that's how we make ATP. Well, what happens in obesity is that builds up in the mitochondria, and the problem is, I like to think of it like a carburetor. Cars in the 80s had carburetors. Now we have fuel injectors. But back in the day, you had a carburetor, and the gas would come in one tube and the air would come in another one. And you could adjust the ratio, right, of the fuel to the air. And if you put in too much fuel and not enough air, it didn't burn cleanly. And then you'd get, black smoke would come out of the tailpipe, the car would backfire, and ultimately would stall out. And so my analogy is that most people, many of us, are in that situation where we have too high of a fuel to air ratio. And so our mitochondria are not burning cleanly. Fuel is building up in the mitochondria as acetyl-CoA and these things called acyl carnitines, right? And if you look at an obese person, we have high circulating levels of acyl carnitines. We have a lot of these things in our building up in our mitochondria as essentially unburned fuel, right? And in this
permanently, they're there permanently in the cells in the mitochondria, or where are they at?
Yeah, right. So the acyl carnitine is like a buffering system for.
Is that what makes the cells that are like bursting and big when they blow up and stuff? Or no?
No, that's a little different. This just comes down to really basic, like when we're burning our food, right, our fuel, whatever you want to call it, for energy, and we're trying to make ATP in the mitochondria. This stuff just builds up, and the effect of that is that it lowers the amount of NAD plus. And NAD plus in this analogy really just means oxygen, because we don't, we ultimately, right, we oxidize our food, but the oxygen doesn't come directly into contact with the acetyl-CoA groups that we're trying to burn. NAD plus does. And so NAD plus is sort of like it's like the middleman between oxygen and the food that we eat is NAD plus, right? And so the problem is we don't have enough NAD plus, and we have too much fuel, and it's not burning cleanly. And we have this buildup of these acyl carnitines and acetyl-CoA and all these intermediate things, and there's too much fuel and there's not enough oxygen, and it just won't burn cleanly. And so because of that, we have this inefficient metabolism. We have, just all kinds of these problems, which ultimately leads to obesity. And of course, this is my argument. My basic argument is that this is all part of the program, right? This is part of winter's coming. We need to fatten up. so what you do is you turn up you turn down the air on your carburetor, and you turn up the fuel, and you flood the engine. That's actually literally what happens as winter approaches, right? And so the question is, how do we fix the air and the fuel nozzles on the carburetor to get out of this torpid state that we find ourselves, right? And so I've been looking at different diets. Keto, like I say, I've done in the past, and keto helps you to one of the things you can do, right? Okay, so if I'm keto, so now I'm just not eating glucose. So now I don't have, right, and the way the fuel gets into the cells, it's kind of a I don't know. It sort of is just this steady state thing that's happening, right, based on the amount of free fatty acids in your bloodstream, which is which is the thing in your bloodstream that moves into the mitochondria, and the glucose that moves into your mitochondria, right? Those are the two main fuels, and also amino acids from protein, right? They're all circulating there in the blood, and they're all going into the mitochondria. So if you go keto, what happens is you essentially are pulling a lot of that glucose out, right? You don't, after a meal, you don't have a rise in blood glucose, and so you're taking that out of the equation, right? And that's one way to kind of prevent this buildup of fuel in the mitochondria, right? But the flip side of that is, if you eat a big starchy meal or a big sugary meal, one of the things one of the things insulin does is it stops your fat cells from doing lipolysis, and that means when the fat cells release free fatty acids and they go into the bloodstream, and this is fat as fuel for the rest of the body, right? So if you eat a big starchy meal, the process of lipolysis is dramatically slowed down, right? And everybody thinks that sounds bad because, well, we have to burn this fat, right? But the thing about that is it allows your mitochondria to actually burn off. Like if the fat supply in the blood drops dramatically, it allows your mitochondria to catch up on some of this backlog of these acylcarnitines and this other unburnt fuel that's in there, because it doesn't take as much. Because when you're burning glucose, it actually produces NAD+. It actually helps you oxygenate, right? There's this old phrase, and they used to teach medical students, called fat burns in the flame of carbohydrate, is the saying, right? And so, and I think this has to do with oxygen, basically. Like if you take wood, right? Wood is, people don't know this, wood is basically made of sugar. It's a long chain glucose that is like very cross-linked, and it makes cellulose, which is what wood is made of, right? And wood burns very effectively, and oil burns effectively too, but like a grease fire is very smoky, right? Grease fires make a lot of smoke. They don't.
You can
burn
kind of see a
cleanly.
transitionary stage between wood and sugar when you chew into a sugar cane raw. You know what I mean? It's got this woody texture on the outside.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Yeah. And it's funny, people, you don't think about wood as being carbs, but it sort of is, right? We can't digest it, but that's what it is. And so, right. And so a hot wood fire burns very cleanly. If you've got, like, I have a fireplace here, and if you get a nice hot fire in there, you don't see any smoke coming out of the chimney. But last year I was deep frying something, and I forgot it, and there's a bunch of people here having a dinner party, and I turned the stove on and I forgot about it, and the whole thing literally burst into flames, and the house filled with smoke, almost immediately, because it's a grease fire, and it takes so much oxygen to burn all of that fuel that's so compact that it doesn't burn as cleanly on its own. And so hence, but if you combine the two, you can burn them both cleanly at the same time. And so that's the sort of the point of this old fat burns in the flame of carbohydrate adage, but it really is true. And so anyway, and so I knew this, um and so I tried earlier this summer. I tried a true low fat diet for the first time. I kind of, I looked at a lot of old papers and a lot of old researchers of people eating tons and tons of carbohydrate. And the thing is, there's these cool studies that they did like in the 80s and 90s where they had people eat just like massive amount of carbohydrates, and they would put them in these metabolic chambers. So they'd live in this like one room apartment essentially, where like the air intake on one side is controlled and the air out is controlled on the other side. And so they can see, based on the amount of oxygen that comes in and the amount of CO2 that goes out, they can actually measure your metabolic rate with essentially 100% efficiency while you're living in this metabolic chamber, right? And so they put people in these little tiny metabolic apartments, and they would just be like, okay, eat all these carbohydrates. And so these guys were eating like 1,000 grams of carbohydrates or something. And what would happen is every day their metabolic rate would go up. It's like when they went in on day 1
grams.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like 4,000,
did they
like
say
four,
they're eating sugar or starches or both or what?
both usually. It's hard to eat 1,000 grams of starch in a day. Sugar is easier to gym to get 1,000 grams down, but that's 4,000 calories or 5,000 calories of pure carbohydrates is what they would eat in these metabolic chambers. And what would happen is every day their basal metabolic rate would go up, like literally like every day for like 10 days. Like I actually never saw anyone plateau. It was just every day it was higher than the last one.
There was no fat. I thought they were eating no fat.
I mean, there's a bunch of different studies, right? It depends on which one we're talking about. But
this study,
most of the studies, they're mostly eating carbs in the ones that I'm talking about. They did, and what happens is with fat doesn't change your metabolic rate in the same way. So if they do studies where they're eating a very high fat diet, you don't see a change in metabolic rate because you're already kind of, in the morning, most people are burning their stored body fat, right? You're already burning your stored body fat. So if you eat a bunch of fat, it really doesn't have any effect on your metabolic rate because you're probably burning that in the morning anyway, right? So it's just kind of the same. But if you have people eat all these carbs, your metabolic rate just goes up and up and up and up and up. And I was like, well, that's very interesting, right? So I tried it, right? And I was doing, sort of famously, it's funny. I was like, well, if this is all true, then I should be able to lose weight eating cornflakes, right? I mean, cornflakes and like 1% milk, right? I was like, because that's low in fat, it's very high in carbs, and I was using supplements, right, too, and it did kind of work actually. I lost
like what, literally frosted flakes and milk.
Just cornflakes and milk, right? I wasn't trying to use a lot of sugar. I was trying to just do like starch and milk, right? Like, so I was like cornflakes and milk. That's what I did for a while. And in the evening, I would have like something like pasta with, like in the morning, I'd have a big or like 2 big bowls of cornflakes. In the evening, I would just have like pasta with red sauce, right? Like, and maybe like a lean piece of chicken, right? Something like that. And I was using SEA, which I sell at fireinabottle.net, which is a supplement that I really like. And I was using alpha lipoic acid, which is another supplement that I like. And they're both designed to kind of help this process of burning cleanly in different mechanisms. But anyway, and it kind of worked. I lost like maybe like 8 pounds in a month or something. But
is that you think that was lipolysis? Was that fat burning, or was that? Or were you doing what Ray Pete suggested about glucuronidation, where you're urinating your PUFA of fat?
Well, I think I was burning the fats. Yeah, I do think I was burning the fats, right? And but it's still right. But something was still missing. And what do I mean by that? My fasting blood glucose in the morning has been high since forever, right? So that would put me in the definition of pre-diabetic, right? Because my fasting blood glucose was usually 115 to 120, which is high, right? That's like, okay, well, you're insulin resistant. Eventually you'll have diabetes. Congratulations. And so So that was a persistent problem, right? And I thought this might, and I've tried a bunch of different diets, and I thought they would help. To me, that's an indicator. I'm like, okay, well, let's see. I'll do this for a week, and I'll check my blood glucose again, and we'll see what happens, right? And it still wasn't going down, right? Even with the supplements and the diet and everything, it still was stubbornly high. And I'm like, there's something that I'm still missing here. And I had stumbled across earlier, just in the literature, in the medical literature, right? You see 1,000 studies, and I'd stumbled across these studies where they were limiting amino acids to these mice, branch chain amino acids, which are our muscles are made of something like, our muscles are made of protein. Proteins are made of amino acids. So amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, and our muscles are about 20% branch chain amino acids. And for some reason, in these mice, if you take away, you could put them on this kind of high fat diet. The high fat diet is kind of a misnomer, but what it is it's about 40% of calories from fat. It's about 20% of calories from protein. And it's a protein that's very high in branch chain amino acids, by the way. It's usually casein from milk. And so that's 60%. And the other 40% of calories is usually a mix of starch and sugar. So this is like, this is like a hyper palatable, and the fat is usually a combination of lard, which is high in monounsaturated fat, as well as most modern lard is also high in polyunsaturated fat. And then it has a little bit of soybean oil in it to push the polyunsaturated fat even a little bit higher. And so this diet really is, we call this living in the swamp, right? That's the term that I like to use, which I stole from a woman named Denise Minger. Maybe she stole it from somebody else. I don't know. But this idea that, you can see good results from diets with people on very low-fat diets, or you can see good results from people on very high-fat diets, right? Like something like keto. But if you're in the middle, if you're like 50-50 fat and starch in mice, this really fattens them up, and that's kind of what the normal American diet is. It's really high starch, right? And so that's what these mice are eating. They're eating a very swampy diet, and they get fat, and they get insulin resistant. But if you take away even just isoleucine, which is one of the branch chain amino acids, they lose the weight and they lose the insulin resistance. And so you can see that
when was this done?
The study I'm referencing was maybe 2018 or 2020, but these studies like this have been around for maybe a decade now. The first studies where they were like, this is weird if you restrict these branch chain amino acids, right? The studies have been getting better and better and drilling down on like this one where they just looked at specific amino acids and found that isoleucine seems to be the key one is a lot more recent. Maybe it's 2020. I'm not sure. And so they tried this in humans. They did a clinical trial, and what they showed is that, okay, it wasn't like a long-term weight loss trial or anything like that, but what they did was they gave people a protein limited diet, and they showed that the branch chain amino acids in their serum drops and their fasting blood glucose drops. And it was statistically significant. So they showed in a small kind of pilot clinical trial in humans that, in fact, if you consume less protein, you'll become more insulin sensitive. And I was like, is that right? That's very interesting, because is
that related to gluconeogenesis, that the extra protein is being converted into sugar, therefore the higher insulin?
Well, so this seems to happen for a bunch of reasons. And actually, on Twitter just last week, we were talking about this, and Amber O'Hearn, who's a friend of mine, she's a very famous carnivore diet supporter. Amber said, when you fast, branch chain amino acids go way up. I didn't know that. But when she said that, it was kind of a eureka moment. I was like, that makes total sense, right? Like, because the again, right, what is the prerogative of the animal? If there's no food around, you want to be insulin resistant. And so if the branched chain amino acids are the thing causing the insulin resistant or causing the insulin resistance, then sure, if there's no food availability, then you do something to surge whatever, I don't know what the mechanism is that causes the increase in branched chain amino acids, but you do that and that helps you become insulin resistant, right? If you have high circulating.
And you want to be insulin resistant when there's no food around because
the point of insulin is to burn glucose, right? And if there's no calories coming in, there's no glucose because animals don't store glucose. So you want to switch over to burning fat if you're in a fasted state, right? And so what you do is you surge branched chain amino acids, and ta-da, you're insulin resistant. And so whatever that mechanism is, presumably that is one of the things that animals are using, in the fall to become torpid. And so I was actually looking at this last night, and it seems like a lot of branched chain amino acids are actually broken down in your adipose tissue. And and one of the things you see in obese people is we have less of this thing called PPAR gamma. These PPARs are transcription factors. They control the production of all of these other genes and all these other enzymes. So there's these kind of high level controllers. And anyway, this one called PPAR gamma is usually low in adipose tissue in obesity, and it's usually high in the liver. You kind of want it the opposite. You want it low in the liver and high in the adipose tissue. And it turns out that this PPAR gamma controls the enzyme that breaks down the branched chain amino acids. And so when you become insulin resistant, what happens is you have less production of this PPAR gamma in your adipose tissue. That lowers the enzyme that breaks down the branched chain amino acids, and branched chain amino acids go up. And then these branched chain amino acids have all these effects to the body. One of them is that they, in skeletal muscles, they drive down the availability of glycine. And glycine is, so if you have, and glycine will actually bind to, this is what you were saying about the urine, glycine will bind to a lot of that fuel, the extra unburnt acetyl-CoA and acylcarnitines, and the glycine will remove it via the urine. It binds to the glycine and you pee it out, essentially.
That extra, still can't figure out. Ray Pete dropped that word, and I've never heard anybody else talk about it.
Yeah.
I don't go digging through the literature like you guys, so I can't say I've done my
right. Yeah, I need to look that up. This is different. It's different from glucuronidation. Yeah, and I should look at that, and I always mean to, and I always forget about it when I'm actually there researching. But yeah, essentially, so the glycine helps us to remove this extra unburnt fuel from our skeletal muscle mitochondria.
Glycine is found primarily in gelatin, which Ray Pete highly encourages people to eat tons of.
Exactly. It's mostly connective tissues.
I'm sorry, I'm a little bit skipping ahead, but it makes sense that in the ancient days, if you were struggling with obesity or something, they'd probably just load you up with soups. Just eat soup, son.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
And low meat.
Right. And elderly, and when you think about it, right, like elderly people, and they say, well, eat broth, eat this soup, right? That's what you give to people who are unwell. Right.
Yes.
And so now it's like, okay, right. It's all kind of starting to come together with this branched chain amino acid stuff. And the that glycine mechanism is not the only way that the branched chain amino acids make you insulin resistant, but I think it's an important one, right? And so
wait, are the branched chain amino acids antagonistic to glycine, doing what it needs to do, or are they
for some reason? Well, there's this one paper, and what it says is that so again they did branched chain amino acid restricted diet in these rats, I think it was, right? And so what they showed is when they removed the branched chain amino acids from the diet, the glycine in the skeletal muscle of the rats increased, and acylcarnitines eliminated and the urine increased, and acylcarnitines in the mitochondria dropped, and they were no longer obese and they were no longer insulin resistant. And it was because of branched chain amino acid restriction. But what they showed is somehow, they don't know exactly how, but somehow the branched chain amino acids were controlling this process of the acylcarnitines being relieved by the glycine. And so that's the evidence, right? And like I said, it's one study. And I don't think there's been a follow-up. But it's a very interesting study. And it really does kind of, like you say, Ray Peat's been talking about, you should eat the same amount of gelatin as you eat skeletal muscle. And he's been saying this since the 80s. And, I ran a butcher shop, we did pigs, and we made bone broths. We sold it wholesale through the US, or the East Coast of the US. So, and I always loved pork skin. I roast these porchettas with the skin on pork roast, and I love eating pork skin, right, which is all gelatin. So I'm a big believer in in gelatin, but I realized that once I wasn't running the butcher shop anymore, I'm not getting the same amount of gelatin and bone broth that I used to, right? We went through a big phase, now my ex-wife and I, but where we were doing bone broth regular, right? Because we worked in the butcher shop, we were making bone broth all the time. So it's like, instead of coffee, we would just sip bone broth, right? Which was a big thing in New York and other places. And everybody says it's good, but I personally, I'm a guy who I like to understand why it's good. There's all kinds of things people say are good, right? And I'm a skeptic, right? I'm like, is that really good? Or you're just saying that because it's trendy to say? Do you know the science behind it? You probably don't, right? And so anyway, when I found this paper in the rats with the glycine, I'm like, oh, wow, it really ties the whole story together, right?
Yeah. What about if you're limiting, you're pretty much, you're like eating 0 branched chain amino acids, right? Or are you like eating 1 gram?
Well, no, you can't eat 0. So,
okay.
Pretty much all proteins have some branched chain amino acids. The difference is that
you're probably eating a day. Or sorry, the difference is that
my guess is I'm eating about 6 grams a day. So, according to whatever I'm trying to think of the name of the NHANES, NHANES, some people call it NHANES, that you can look up, like, they track what the average American eats, right? So you can look on there, I think it's called What We Eat in America. So according to that, the average American is eating about 16 grams of branched chain amino acids. So I'm trying to eat half of that or less. And that's kind of like
80 grams of protein, muscle meat, then how much of that would probably be branched chain amino acids?
Right. So how it breaks down is that muscle meats typically are around 18% branched chain amino acids. If you call it 20%, the math is easier. So if I was to eat 100 grams of protein, I'd be at about, of skeletal muscle protein, right? I'd be at around 18 grams of branched chain amino acids. If I was to eat the same amount of gelatin, I'd be at about 6. Because gelatin's about 6% branched chain amino acids. And so, it's a threefold difference there, right? And and that's actually, that number is not arbitrary. The average American male eats somewhere around 100 grams of protein, and it's 16 or 18 grams of branched chain amino acids. And so I'm trying to do half that or less, and I'm probably under 8 grams most days. I'm probably at 5 or 6 grams. I'm not sure on average, something like that. And so if you look at studies where they say, well, how much of the different amino acids do we need, right? And there's a funny thing. So I have this app called Chronometer or Chronometer. I don't know how you say it. And you can hit your daily, like, if you look at the daily amino acids that you need, you can hit 100% of all the essential amino acids, right? There's 8 that we call essential. Glycine is not one of them, interestingly, but we're not good at making glycine, so it sort of is essential. But anyways, the essential amino acids, you can hit 100% of all of those and only be at like 25% of your protein requirement, right? Which is a weird thing. And so I think that our kind of like the sort of recommended amounts of total protein that we need is probably a lot less than people think that it is. People think you have to get 16 or 18% protein. I raise pigs. You can raise pigs, and pigs are like, when you think about an animal that is packing on lean mass, a fast growing pig can gain 2 pounds a day, and most of that is muscle, right? And a pig growing that fast only needs 13% protein, something like that, right? Because the carbohydrates are burned as energy, and it's only that little bit of extra amino acids that are used to build that actual muscle. It's not much. So my argument is that like the actual human need is probably well below the 13% that a fast growing pig needs. And I don't know what the exact amount is, but obviously a lot of people get very concerned if I say you should restrict protein. They're like, but we need protein to build. And I was like, well, we do, but this rapid growing pig needs 13%, and an adult human shouldn't really be growing at all. So, and you can, when you break down your muscles, of course, you can reuse those.
And you probably would want to you would probably want to up that though when you're like in senior years, right? When you're wasting away with muscle.
Yeah, right, sure, yes, exactly, right, and so right. So my argument is in the context of weight loss. Well, the other thing about weight loss is that if you're actively losing weight, when you become obese, you pack on fat, but you also pack on a lot of extra muscle. There was this paper from I think it was maybe from the 70s, and they looked at women and men, and it was like there was normal men and normal women, and then there was what they called muscular men. So I don't, these guys were working out, or they were just, I don't know if I can't remember how they decided they were muscular, maybe just how they looked. I don't know. And then there were obese men. And what you saw was that the muscular men had the normal men had like, I don't know, 50 kilograms of muscle. The muscular men had like 60 kilograms of muscle, let's say. And then the obese men had 65 kilograms of muscle, right? So the obese men had more muscle than the quote unquote strong men. And so when you gain weight, you're adding both fat and muscle. And so when you're losing weight, that means you have a whole bunch of extra muscle that is being broken down as you lose the weight. And so that's another source of protein, right? Because those amino acids, they don't go away. They go in your bloodstream, and cells can reuse them. So if you're actively losing weight, essentially every day, you can recycle these amino acids that are just part of the structure of the fat, or however it works. And so that's another source, that's another source of amino acids. So, and that's one of the many reasons that I'm not worried.
But that's one of the criticisms I've heard from the repeat people, is that you don't want to burn, you don't want to shred up your muscle while you're losing weight.
Well, you don't want
to you're wasting away at that point, becomes skinny fat or whatever, where you've got no muscle left, and you're kind of not quite there with your.
Right. So that right. And I agree that we don't want to go there, but in my opinion, many fat people, certainly myself, right. My problem is not lack of muscle. It never has been, right. I've always been a muscular guy, but I'm a muscular fat guy. Right. And so when I look at my own physiology, I'm not terribly right. And why am I muscular? Well, one of the reasons is that, I probably do. So one of the things the branched chain amino acids do is they activate something called mTOR. mTOR is very anabolic. It causes you to build muscle. It's part of the insulin signaling pathway, and this is very famous molecule in a lot of metabolic circles. But
it for cancer and other issues, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so mTOR causes you to build muscle, but it also causes you to build fat. right? And so it does both. And it's activated by branched chain amino acids. It's activated by leucine. So if you have high circulating branched chain amino acids, you're going to have an activated mTOR, and that's going to cause you to build muscle and fat. And probably depending on your genetics, in some people, it's going to cause them to build more muscle, and in some people, it's going to cause them to build more fat. But either way, the process of, anabolic things cause you to do both.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm sure there are tricks to make it do one versus the other, but just very generally speaking, right? If you're in an anabolic mTOR activated state, you're going to pack on lean and you're going to pack on fat. And then if you reverse that process, you're going to lose a lot of fat, but you're going to lose some of that lean too. And I'm fine with that, right? I'm not worried about wasting away, right? Like as far as I can tell, I still have very strong forearms, which is, one of the tests of strength.
You're going to be ready to join a wrestling
strength
pretty soon. Looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was a wrestler and
you
high
really
school, actually. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Well, and that's probably one of the reasons that I was already obese before, right? I was already a fat kid before I wrestled, but but that meant that 4 years in a row, I did the thing where you basically starve yourself for 6 weeks, right? Because I weighed 185 pounds in the off season and I wrestled at 155 pounds, if you believe that. And so, but I'd have to lose 30 pounds every year. And so I essentially did, The Biggest Loser, kind of the TV show, right? That's essentially what I did every year.
What is that, like low calorie?
Yeah, like almost not. Like I literally almost went down to nothing. Like I'd eat a tablespoon of peanut butter. That was my diet for 6 weeks.
You're not doing that now. You're not restricting.
No,
calories.
well, I don't believe that. I think it's a bad idea, and I think I probably did permanent damage to my metabolism by doing that. Right, but
what's worse, keto, carnivore, or low calorie in that regard, in that matter?
I think low calorie is the worst. I think low calorie is the worst thing that you can do to yourself.
And you typically. Excuse me, but typically when you do keto or carnivore, you typically do low calorie anyways, right? Because you don't eat as much sometimes. So
yeah, that's true. That's true, and I think that's fine. I think if you're eating to satiety, I think it's better than if you're purposefully just white knuckling it and avoiding the hunger pangs, right?
Okay, I see what you're saying. So you're saying it's probably, let me get this right. It's probably healthier. It's probably a healthier form of low calorie on a keto carnivore when you're eating to satiety than it is to try to do another type of low calorie where you're not eating to satiety. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And great, because the type of dieting that I did in high school for sure, but even at later points in my life was just like, just ignore the hunger, right? For as long as you can.
Yeah.
And this works, right? On some level, you can lose weight doing that, but it sucks. And then you will have a permanently lowered metabolic rate as a result of this. And I don't say that hyperbolically. Kevin Hall did a study where he looked at Biggest Loser contestants.
Yeah.
And so they go on this show, they lose 200 pounds or whatever it is. And then he did their metabolic rate before the show. And then he followed up with them 7 years later. And 7 years after the show, inevitably, everyone on the show has regained all of the weight and more.
Is it because they've messed up their thyroid and their hormones and everything?
Yeah, and so he tested them again 7 years later, and they have a permanently lowered fasting metabolic rate than before they were on the show, even 7 years later. So that kind of dieting does produce real long-term damage, right? And it's not a good idea, right? And so, but obviously the problem is, if you're in this anabolic state, if you've got activated mTOR, if you're insulin resistant, right? You're not the thing about obese people is they don't burn glucose efficiently. And the reason they don't burn glucose efficiently is exactly what we were talking before. Too much fuel in the mitochondria. So you eat a bunch of whatever, potatoes, pasta, whatever. That glucose comes in, and instead of burning it, it gets shifted into doing de novo lipogenesis or other kinds of storage activities, right? The insulin is activating mTOR, causing you to be anabolic. You're doing all these things to store the energy rather than burn it, and that's the problem, right? And so the way to get out of
Your
that,
body's trying to produce fat and muscle with all those carbs. It doesn't know what else to do with it.
right, exactly. And the reason for that is that your mitochondria is overloaded with
Your body's trying
acetocarnitines
to
and
turn you into a
acetyl-CoA.
big, fat, muscly bear for
Mm-hmm.
a nice long sleep.
Exactly,
But
exactly. I mean,
why would your
that
body,
is the literal analogy.
yeah,
Right.
why would your body want to build muscle while you're sleepy and torpor? Because if someone wakes you up, you got to be able to whoop them. Is that the idea?
Well,
Survival.
I think that I think evolution does a lot of creative reuse of
Yeah.
things. It's like it's hard to evolve something new, but if you already have this system that's sitting there that you can reuse, right? And so it's like, okay, it's springtime, times are plentiful. Let's get anabolic, right? Like there's lots of food, and part of being anabolic is reproduction, right? So if you're a woman and food is plentiful, you're going to activate mTOR because it's like, okay, we're going to make babies, right? And that takes energy, and that's building muscle and protein and fat and all the things, right? And so there's good reasons that we want to be anabolic at certain points, and there's good reasons why activating mTOR and becoming anabolic can help you produce both muscle and fat, right? But if you're an adult that is not planning to become pregnant, whether or not you're a man or a woman, you don't necessarily want to grow, right? The point is not growth. So that's the problem, right? We're in growth mode, sort of inappropriately.
We want to grow in character, not in our size necessarily the entire time.
Right, exactly. And so that, I think that is the so anyway, so then you put this all together, and that's why I had this idea. I was like, okay, so what we want to do is we want to be able to burn glucose, right? And the reasons for that are multiple. But I think for me, the biggest reason is that when you're efficiently burning glucose, it increases the amount of NAD plus in your mitochondria. And like I say, the NAD plus really just means oxygen, right? It increases the
Is that what produces heat and the vital? Is that the
right? Yeah, I mean that is NAD plus essentially is metabolic rate, right? If you have NAD plus, you can burn the fuel. It's like increasing the air intake on your carburetor, right? It's like, okay, now we're burning cleanly, things are working. And so how did we get there? Right. And so I like burning carbs. I like burning starch. And so what was holding us back? Well, one was that if you're obese, you have these inflammatory things like tissue necrosis factor alpha, and tissue necrosis factor alpha causes you to do this sort of inappropriate lipolysis in your fat cells. And that means that if you're lean and you eat starch, your free fatty acids drop way down. They get out of the way to allow you to burn the glucose, right? Is probably the best way to say that. They go down to here, right? If you're fat and you have adipose tissue inflammation, you eat the meal, insulin goes up, but now you only come down to here, right? And so you're not as good at suppressing lipolysis in response to starch if you're obese, because of the adipose tissue inflammation. And so that's one of the reasons that you can't burn glucose effectively.
And that's why keto people are the most effective at losing weight, because the whole America is to one degree or another more likely to be metabolically broken in that pathway, right?
Right, exactly. So you can say, well, then fine, I'll just burn this fat then, right? And that's kind of what keto is. Yeah, and that's okay, right?
Like
that's okay.
I'm done with it,
Right.
We're on strike. We're not going back to glucose as much as we can.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's exactly what keto does. And so that's okay, but it's not my preferred strategy, right? Like when I look around the world, right, and I see, okay, well, the Okinawans eat sweet potatoes, and that's one of the longest lived cultures in the world. And sweet potatoes are very high in starch, and guess what? They're low in branched chain amino acids compared to just regular potatoes or compared to grains. And so you're like, well, that's interesting, isn't it? And so, right, I look around the world and I see all these healthy starch eating cultures, and they're lean and they're very, very high metabolic rates. And I'm like, well, that seems like a better metabolic outcome than being keto to me.
Now,
And it's not that you can't find healthy cultures that live mostly on fat. Of course you can. People point to the Inuit. People point to the Native Americans that were hunting the buffalo, and of course all in the Maasai warriors in Africa. Right? You can find cultures around the world that are living primarily on fat. And I don't really have a problem with people who want to do that. It's fine, right? It's just, I think there is this other alternative out there, and if we put the keys together, we can figure out what it is.
I wonder if the Maasai have lower thyroid, but they're moving all the time and they're eating honey too, though, so it'd be hard to test.
Oh yeah. No, I mean they're also very lean, but they're also very tall, and part of that might be that dairy is very high in branched chain amino acids, and they make you grow, right? So
it's true. Those the dairy people, the people that eat a lot of dairy in Northern Europe are pretty tall too, right? Some of those guys.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so you kind of see, right? You see how it all comes together. And that growth is fine to a point, but
what if it's just like keto on a reverse scale? Like, because you're eliminating as much as your branched chain amino acids as you can. You're eating a lot of gelatin to get the glycine, and you're lowering your fat very low to, I think you said 30 grams to me before.
Something like that. Yeah, that's probably about right. And then, I'm just eating tons of starch.
Yeah. So what happens if, like, you just do this and then you get to your ideal weight or whatever, and then all of a sudden you try to start introducing fat? Will your body develop an inability to?
No, I think that's fine. I think that's fine, right? Because right now, I'm like, so I announced, you saw the thing, I'm sure, that in the last month I've lost 14 pounds in 28 days doing this. And so
we kind of buried the lead here. We should put that.
We did bury the lead a little bit, but so that means that I'm burning fat right now, right? I'm burning lots of fat. And so at some point I won't have any body fat to burn left, right? And then I can just replace that with butter, which is better anyways, because if you're fat, your body fat is really unsaturated. It's probably mostly monounsaturated fat, and possibly, depending on what you've been eating, a pretty high amount of polyunsaturated fat.
What happens if you replace, so you add the butter, you add some branched chain amino acid type grains back in, and then shit, it's snapping right back to the same problem again, you know?
So then my approach, probably knowing what I know now, would be to back off again of the branched chain amino acids. The more that I look at it,
so you think fat will be able to be increased more healthily long term than maybe the branched chain amino acids? Is that right? Maybe?
I also want to say, I also don't really want to throw branched chain amino acids under the bus. I don't think protein is bad. I don't think branched chain amino acids are bad. The problem is that you have dysregulated hormones that are not allowing you to break down the branched chain amino acids. The flip side of this equation is that the branched chain amino acids are one of the most thermogenic foods. When we talk about NAD plus and increasing oxygen in the mitochondria, the branched chain amino acids are like the single most effective thing at doing that. They're even better they're actually a lot better than glucose at injecting NAD plus. But the problem is, it's the chicken and the egg. It seems like for some reason, if you're obese, you really are not making much of the enzyme that breaks down the branched chain amino acids. So the long-term goal is to reboot, increase production of that enzyme that breaks down the branched chain amino acids, and perhaps be able to use protein as a tool again, right? Because there's lots of people who do fine on a high protein diet, right? And there's whole, Ted Naiman has a whole diet that's just eat protein, because it's the one food that is sort of low in energy. It doesn't have all the starch and fat, and the starch and fat are what's making you fat. And for some people that might be true, right? For some subset of people, if you are good at burning those branched chain amino acids, they're fine, right? And so, yeah, I mean, ultimately the goal is to get back to where I can burn those branched chain amino acids again. There's actually, I don't think there's anything wrong with eating protein or burning protein. It's just that, right, the problem is not the protein. The problem is your metabolic state, right, or my metabolic state.
Do you want to burn? Do you want to burn branched amino acids in a healthy
well,
state?
if you're eating, well, I mean, look, if you're eating chicken breast, yeah, you want to burn it, right? Because you can't. I mean, you can't, right? If you eat a pound, if you eat a pound of chicken breast, you need like, right, you need 10 grams of that protein, right?
Okay.
So yeah, you want to burn the rest of it for energy, because what are you going to do with all that protein? You have no need for it, right? There's no biological need for it.
And the only way to burn it is to do gluconeogenesis, right? To turn it into glucose. Is that right?
Well, that's not quite right. So, and this is probably one of the ways that the branched chain amino acids actually work, is that, so they all, through various, depending on what amino acid it is, they get broken down and then they enter the Krebs cycle at different points, right? And the Krebs cycle is the kind of central cycle in our metabolism that we use to generate ATP, right? We burn our food in the Krebs cycle. And so what happens is the branched chain amino acids enter the Krebs cycle at different points. And some of them enter in at a point that they can be diverted into gluconeogenesis, and they can be made, like you say, into glucose. Other ones enter at a different point or not at all, and those can be made into ketones. So those are called ketogenic amino acids. And so it depends on the amino acid, but some of them can be used for gluconeogenesis, but we can also just burn them and make ATP in the Krebs cycle. And that might actually be one of the ways that they work, is that it seems like we primarily, for whatever reason, we primarily burn the branched chain amino acids in our fat tissue, in our adipose tissue. And so when the adipose tissue stops breaking them down, they go up in the blood, and that means all of the other cells, again, like it's like I was saying about that mitochondria, and it's overloaded with fuel. And so now branched chain amino acids rise, and now the branched chain amino acids are pouring into your skeletal muscle cells, and they're entering the Krebs cycle in a way that is perhaps overloading parts of it, right? And this is all part of a coordinated thing. And you probably also have low succinate dehydrogenase, and a lot of the amino acids have to go through succinate dehydrogenase, and that is lower activity, and so it's all just kind of building up, right? It's just adding to this fuel buildup in your mitochondria that is, making you not burn cleanly, right? And so that's getting pretty technical, but but yeah, essentially, right? Like you want your mitochondria to burn cleanly, and you have all of these things flowing into it: fat, glucose, amino acids, and it sort of is, on a very simple level, you could just say, well, we want, if we get these fuels down in our bloodstream, then we'll burn more cleanly because we'll have a better fuel to oxygen mixture, right? And that's sort of an oversimplified way to look at it, but it's part of the equation.
So in lowering your branched chain amino acids and lowering and increasing your glycine for gelatin, and lowering your fat and increasing your starch, do you have less free floating fatty acids in your bloodstream now, or what?
Right. So one of the things that I'm doing is, when I eat, so I've been eating pancakes for breakfast, right? Every morning. And so I wake up, I make this meal. It has about, and I've been weighing everything out on the scale because I'm trying to be consistent, right? And so this morning meal has about 200 grams of carbohydrates. Most of it is starch, but some of it is like maple syrup, right? And I use fruit preserves on there. It's very tasty. And part of the idea of that is I want to produce a large insulin response, right? My goal is to wake up and surge insulin, right? Because insulin is the thing that suppresses the lipolysis in the fat cells, right? And people think that sounds bad. They're like, well, I want to burn that fat. I want to release the fat and burn it. And you do, but again, if you go back to the principle of fat burns in the flame of carbohydrate, what you want to do is you want to surge insulin, and that's going to allow you to clean out the unburnt fuel in your mitochondria. It's going to get you going. It's going to get you burning. And then all that starch that you just ate is going to be stored as glucose. Now you've got, now you have this stored carbohydrate, right? We can store, I don't know how many grams, but, X amount of carbohydrates in our muscle cells as glycogen, in our liver as glycogen. And so then you have this stored carbohydrate. And then in the hours after the meal, as your lipolysis starts to increase again, and as more fat and more fat becomes available, now your mitochondria is burning cleanly, right? You've cleaned out the unburnt fuel, you're burning well, and you have all this carbohydrate to burn along with the fat as it comes in. And since your branched chain amino acids are not high, they're not in there jamming up the works, right? So that's kind of the idea is wake up, activate insulin, get things burning, and then the rest of the day, you'll be okay because you've started your day with this big insulin surge and you've loaded up on glycogen, and now you can burn cleanly. That is the idea, and so far this has been working very well. And the key, for whatever reason, for me, the final piece of the puzzle was lowering the branched chain amino acids and increasing the glycine. That went from this thing that was like kind of sort of working to, wow, this is great.
Yeah. And you've lowered, I don't think you've mentioned this yet, but you've really lowered your insulin, I mean, your glucose level, right? Your
Right. Yeah. So my fasting blood glucose in the morning had typically been 118, maybe something like that. And that's very consistent. And I did a bunch of different diets and it was always the same. And then within a week of dropping the branched chain amino, and this is, so in human trials, you can show this, that in 3 days of branched chain amino acid restriction, blood levels decline, and within a week they decline even more, right? In clinical trial in humans. And so they're pretty responsive to dietary intake. And so, yeah, for me, within a week, I did that, and the blood glucose went to, 90 in the morning, which is, the ideal is probably 80, but some mornings I'm in at 82, right? So I've had days when
Oh, go ahead.
I've had days when my glucose is considered perfect, right? 82. That's like about as, like, if you're below 70, that's hypoglycemic. I mean, 90 is fine. There's nothing really wrong with 90, but anything above 100 is considered pre-diabetic. But so I've had days when I'm 82, and it's interesting, right? Because, people say that, well, if you lose weight, you'll become more insulin sensitive, right? So again, it's this kind of chicken and egg discussion. It's like, yeah, well, anything that, well, if you eat low fat, your insulin, your fasting insulin will get better. If you do this, if you lose weight, your insulin will get better, right? And your fasting blood glucose will get better. And there's some truth, of course, to all those things. But I think what this experiment has shown me is that, the insulin resistance is controlled by these very specific things. And if you understand how it works, you can actually fix your insulin resistance and then use that as a lever to lose weight, rather than saying, well, I have to starve myself to lose this weight and then hope that my insulin resistance gets better over time. I say, no, fix the insulin resistance first, and then the weight loss becomes easy, because I'm eating 3,000 calories a day. I think I am pretty close to it anyway. I'm definitely not eating below 2,500
calories. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not eating I'm definitely not eating below 2,500 calories a day.
Take it out there.
Yeah. And so
full stack or a short stack to get there.
It's three pretty big pancakes. So it's,
you put fruit in there too?
The recipe's on fireinaBottle.net, but it's 65 grams of what I call this fiorglut flour, which is an Italian flour that's made of wheat starch. So it's made with the starch of wheat, so it kind of tastes like regular flour, but it has all the protein removed, so there's no gluten in it. So it's fine to eat if you're gluten intolerant. So I do 65 grams of that and 65 grams of cassava flour, which I really like. Cassava flour is very low in protein. It's very low in branching amino acids, and it's very slowly absorbed. So it's like a good, slow release starch, right? And it's got one egg in it. So there's a little bit of protein in there, but it's not a lot. And, and I put maple syrup on there, of course. So anyways, it's about 200 grams of total carbs, and it's, And then I've been doing watching my blood glucose for like 2 hours or 3 hours after I eat the pancakes to make sure. What you want to see is you have that initial blood glucose spike, and then it comes down pretty quickly. So I did an oral glucose tolerance test. And that was funny because, so I did this, it was a weird time to do it. And it was kind of on purpose. I was doing a diet where I was fasting a lot. And I gave so an oral glucose tolerance test, you take 75 grams of glucose, and then you monitor your blood glucose levels for 2 hours. Yeah. And you're supposed to be below 140 at the 2 hour mark. That's the definition of, if you're over 140, then you're pre-diabetic. If you're over 200, then you're diabetic, right? That means you're not burning glucose. Yeah. And so I had been doing this fasting diet, and I did that oral glucose tolerance test. At that point, this was like 2 years ago, and I was at like 160 or 180. Now, that's a bad time to do it because part of the point of fasting is you're insulin resistant, right? So anyway, I just redid this last week because I wanted to see where am I at. I think I'm burning glucose well, but let's give myself an oral glucose tolerance test at home. Normally you do this in a clinic, of course, but you can go to any drugstore and buy glucose tablets, right? And then you just look at how many. In my case, it was like 20 of these big like wafers of candy that I had to eat, right? So you eat all this candy, and then anyway, 2 hours later, I was at like 67, which is like hypoglycemic, and I got kind of like, and I've never had low blood sugar has never been an issue for me, like ever, right? Like I'm never low. Even when I feel kind of spaced out and weird, sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm having a hypoglycemic, and I'll check my blood, and no, it's 140, and so, but I did this oral glucose tolerance test, and I was at 67.
Don't diabetics hypoglycemic too? Sometimes they drop real, if they don't know.
Well, I think that's more in type 1 diabetes, and I think that's because you injected too much insulin.
Okay.
Right. So they're not becoming a diabetic. If you're not injecting insulin, doesn't become hypoglycemic. Sometimes you inject too much insulin, and then you will become hypoglycemic. But that's right. But that's as a result of overdoing it on the insulin. Yeah. And so it's possible that what I assume happened there, right, is normally I've been eating this 200-gram glucose meal in the morning. Right. And I went down to 75 grams. And that, of course, those glucose candy is very rapidly absorbed. Right. So it's probably going to produce a quick insulin spike because your blood sugar goes up fast. And I've been doing a lot of, starch in the morning. So my body is used to like wake up and release this insulin. And so that probably pushed the needle too far towards burning carbs, and I only ate 75 grams instead of my normal 200, right? And so I got a little hypoglycemic. But to me, that's like, okay, well, that means I'm burning the carbohydrates, right? That's, I think, the important thing. I think if you can burn the carbohydrates cleanly, that puts you in a position to, do what I'm doing, which is eat a lot of starch, burn your body fat using the NAD plus from that starch, maintain a high caloric input while losing weight, right? I think that's the key is to lose weight while consuming sufficient calories. If you can do those things together, I think that's how you can start to fix your metabolism rather than
what?
Rather than, you know, trying to starve yourself and then giving yourself long-term metabolic damage.
Do you think
or
you could
something like keto is another a way around it. And again, I'm not anti-keto. I think if you want to do keto and you're happy living that lifestyle, that's fine. But like, you know, I want a solution that's better for that I can, you know, that my mother can do, right? That people who don't want to just eat meat.
Do you think what was I going to say there? Do you think you would have got the same results without all your supplements that you're taking? I don't want to get into all the different ones you're doing, but you've got a few different things you're doing there.
Yeah, and I'm not doing that many. Really the main ones that I'm doing are alpha lipoic acid. So alpha lipoic acid is a very what it does is essentially and I'm using the R, like there's a right-handed and left-handed version of it.
With the pancakes, you take that in the morning?
I take that with the pancakes, right? So RALA is like what it does is it goes into your mitochondria, and we use it to convert NADH back to NAD plus. So it's like this instant NAD plus boost. It gets you out of that fuel buildup situation, right? And so that's a great one. And you can, and in a mouse model, in a rodent model, there's one study where they did like, you know, we have all these different models of obesity in mice. One is like diet-induced obesity. Another one is like genetic obesity. And so they showed that in all of these different mouse models, the ALA completely reverses the obesity, or mostly reverses the obesity anyways. And so this is super effective, right? Like just getting rid of the NADH and converting it back to NAD plus goes a long way towards your ability to burn glucose, to do all of it, right? And so that for me is just like, if someone is like, I want to take one supplement, I'd say get RALA and take that with all your meals and just do that. And and it's not expensive, you know, it's a cheap thing. It's been around forever. That's a good one. And I take a B complex vitamin, which is just, you know, good, probably, you know, B vitamins, obviously we need for metabolism, and anyone could get benefit from B vitamins. And then the other ones I take are SEA. So SEA, I sell at fireinaBottle.net/shop. So this one is kind of my thing. And, but it really is interesting. What it does is it blocks. So one of the things I talk about a lot on fireinaBottle.net is that our body fat is unsaturated compared to 100 years ago. So, or even 80 years ago, they did the first studies on this. The first study on this, where we have data on human body fat composition, is in the US. It's from Ohio State, I think. And it's 1943. And they reported that healthy humans had something like 8% stearic acid in their fat tissue. And if you look at modern studies, that number is like 3.3%. And part of that is because we've substituted the polyunsaturated fats for stearic acid in our tissue. But another huge part of that is we have this upregulated enzyme called SCD1, and it's involved in, you know, torpid animals increase SCD1 as they get ready to store fat for winter, right? And we all make more of this enzyme than we did 80 years ago. And yes, part of that is because of our consumption of vegetable oils, or maybe the largest part of it is because of our consumption of vegetable oils. That's why the SCD1 got upregulated in the first place. But now that it's upregulated, anyway, it gives us all these problems because the stearic acid gets converted into this signaling molecule called stearoyl ethanolamide, which is what the SEA stands for. And that SEA binds to and blocks NF-kappa beta, which is involved in our innate immune system. NF-kappa beta essentially runs our innate immune system. This is an 800 million year old molecule, and what the NF-kappa beta controls is tissue necrosis factor alpha, and that's the thing that causes your fat cells to do all this inappropriate lipolysis, right? So what I was saying is, when you eat glucose, what you want to happen is you want your free fatty acids to drop, because your fat cells stop doing lipolysis. That lets you clean out your mitochondria and burn that fuel, right? And one of the reasons that we can't do that is because our bodies are low in stearic acid. And this is all, like I say, this is how the system is designed, right? It's a whole loop. And so there's no stearic acid, therefore tissue necrosis factor alpha is high. Therefore we have adipocyte inflammation. And therefore the adipose tissue is just dumping all of this extra fat when it shouldn't be, right? Lipolysis itself is fine, but you lose control over it because of the adipose tissue inflammation, because of the TNF alpha. And one of the reasons you have the elevated TNF alpha is because this enzyme SCD1 is upregulated, which is how mammals store fat for winter. And because of that, you don't have SEA.
So in some ways, it's like if you're obese, it's like you've got so much fuel on your body and there's always little fires breaking out, kind of thing, right? They're not inappropriate.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so one of the ways you can stop doing
the house
that
with fuel, and you got
right.
fire.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, taking that SEA in the morning is a way of, sort of fooling my body into thinking that my body fat composition was the same as a person in 1940, right?
But what I'm getting at is, do you think you probably would have had the same, and I'm not trying to,
oh yeah, sure,
push the products away, but I'm just saying, do you think this discovery you've made with this diet experiment so far could have been the similar results if you had not taken those things you just mentioned?
Yeah, I think it would have worked the same. I mean, so if we go back to experiments, if you go back to experiments in mice,
that's the guy you want to buy products from, when he's willing to say, "Hey, look, these products may not necessarily be necessary for everybody." I like that. That's
totally. No, sure. I just think what they are is they're levers, right? They're additional levers that we can use to accelerate the process, which is great, right? We like fast results, and so. But if you look at a mouse model, if you just restrict isoleucine, which is one of the branched chain amino acids, if you just do that one thing, the mice become lean, right? And then you look at a human clinical trial, if you just have the people, cut their protein intake in half, their fasting blood glucose drops, right? And so that's
without even adding the gelatin or lowering the fat that they're eating.
Yeah, just okay. Right. If you just do that one thing, you'll have lower fasting blood glucose.
Pete recommends like 80 grams of protein a day if you're trying to lose weight.
And I'm probably below that right now. If you look at the recommendation, from whatever, it's published all kinds of places online. They say that an adult male needs, I think it's 55 grams of protein, and an adult female needs 45 grams of protein, right? Yeah. So it's, most of us are getting double the recommendation. The average American gets twice the recommendation. And a surprising amount of that comes from grains and potatoes. People don't realize, grains aren't super high in protein, but they are around 8 to 10%. Flour's higher. Wheat is like 12 or 14% protein. And what's that?
What's corn at?
Corn's 8%, rice is 8%, something like that. But the thing about those grains is they're very high in branched chain amino acids. The protein in grain has the same percentage of branched chain amino acids as meat. So it's all around 18% or something like that. And so, if you're trying to do a diet like I'm doing, right, and you say, well, I'm just going to eat corn tortillas, right, and then you're like, well, if I eat 2,000 calories of corn tortillas, I'm trying to do the math in my head, I'm like, that's like 18% of those, call it 20%, that's like 400 calories from protein, which is 100 grams of protein, right, that you would get. And that's going to be 18 grams of branched chain amino acids. which is a lot. and so I'm trying to get below 8, right? So there's no way that I could do what I'm doing now by eating corn or potatoes or rice. And so that's why I'm eating a lot of cassava, right? Cassava is this big starchy root. It has almost no protein, and it's like one out of every 6 humans on the planet, their staple food is cassava, right? So I feel like cassava has been well tested as a base diet.
Yucca. You can get
Yucca is another name for it.
The other day I was trying to boil it and I didn't boil it right. It's like it was like really gummy on the outside, but very like mealy and starchy on the inside.
It takes a long time. It can be very starchy. What I've been doing, and I love this. I made this yesterday. This is becoming my kind of go-to recipe. So I've been making gnocchi, right? The Italian, it's like a little Italian dumpling. And what you do is you boil the cassava I boil it for like half an hour. And then I just mash it. And I add that Fiorglut flour that I was talking about, the gluten-free wheat flour. And you basically add an egg. It's like if you have like 2 pounds of yucca, a cup of flour, 1 egg, salt, and like a tablespoon of baking powder. And the yucca it's very dense. It's very starchy and it's very dense, but the baking powder will help it, have a lighter texture. And you basically just mash that together. And then you can roll it out into it's like working with Play-Doh at that point, right? And you just roll it into these long like tubes, and then you just cut it up with a knife and you boil it for like 5 minutes, and you have gnocchi. And then I'll take my I'll just put some I get beef tendon at the right. Beef tendon is super high super high in collagen. And
that's
have
what gummy bears are made from, probably the good ones.
Right? Yeah. Well, yeah, gummy bears mostly made from pigskin. Actually, pigskin is also very high in gelatin. But anyway,
little British brand I get is beef gelatin gummy bears.
Oh, beef gelatin. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's probably true. But so then anyway, yeah. So you just take the beef tendon. Usually, it can be a little strong flavored. So what I'll do is I'll bring it to a boil and I'll simmer it for like 15 minutes, and then I'll throw out the water, and then I'll replace the water and let it simmer for another like 2 or 3 hours. And then I just throw like a can of crushed tomatoes and a can of tomato sauce and a can of tomato paste in there. And I throw in my rosemary and, oregano, whatever you want to throw in there, and let that simmer for a while. And then the gnocchis take 15 minutes to make. And usually when I make them, it's enough for like 3 or 4 meals. And so then I got this pot of tomato sauce with the beef tendon in it. And I've got my gnocchi in the fridge. And if I'm hungry, as soon as we get off, I'm literally just going to, throw those gnocchi on a cutting board, chop them up in little pieces, boil them 5 minutes, heat up I got the marinara sauce with the beef tendon preheating, and you just, boom, there's lunch. It's super easy.
Now, Brad, it is easy, what you're saying, but I want to go for the audience, because you're like a Michelin star train, or what are you?
Well,
like where'd you go? Come on. Let's cough it up. Tell us.
I did go to the French Culinary Institute. That's true. So I am a good chef, and I did run a restaurant. I ran the Piggery restaurant in Ithaca. We were doing farm to table, mostly pork.
Put star badge now. Come on.
Right. So I am a good chef, but nonetheless, gnocchi is really easy to make.
I know. All right, but
everyone's Italian grandmother can tell you how to make gnocchi. I don't personally have an Italian grandmother, but I know people who do.
And I want everybody to do these. I want everybody to go to your website. Is that where you get the recipes or ideas or everything?
Yeah, I mean the gnocchi recipe. My Twitter account is fire_bottle. I literally tweeted. I didn't even tweet the recipe. I just tweeted a link to the woman whose recipe that I use. And then I say, except instead of regular flour, use the Fiorglut flour to get rid of the branching amino acids, and add baking soda because otherwise they're too dense. But
I want to try to like draw this down to the lowest common denominator as possible. So what I'm saying is, okay, can you just spout out a bunch of foods that's going to get you to that 2,000, 3,000 calories a day that will keep you in the zone you're at without having to do a lot of cooking. Because there's a lot of working class men and women. I'm very pro working class men and women, and I want things that they can even go to a gas station and get, even if it's liquid calories or whatever.
Right. So if we go to snack foods, right, we'll start there. So some things you can buy in a gas station. One is, we've already said it, gummy bears, right? Gummy bears are made of gelatin, and they're mostly glucose, right? So
sure they don't have vegetables in them. Some of them have vegetable oils.
Some of them have vegetable oils, but like I usually get the Haribo, HARIBO brand, the Haribo brand. They're like I say, it's glucose syrup and gelatin. So that's almost like the definition of this diet, right? It's like you could just eat Haribo gummy bears all day and it would probably work. I don't know. I mean, I love gummy bears. Don't get me wrong. I eat them. I'm driving to
There's
Buffalo
a lot of
later.
people.
I'm driving to Buffalo
wake
later.
up at 5 and,
absolutely going to get 2 packages of Harry gummy bears and eat them on the way to Buffalo. So, so yeah, highly recommend. Another one that works if you find yourself in a gas station and you need something, there's a couple different brands of gluten-free pretzels.
Okay.
And if you look at what you're looking for, essentially, if you want to do this diet, is almost pure forms of starch, right? So the gluten-free pretzels, so wheat pretzels, of course, are high in protein and they're high in branched-chain amino acids. The gluten-free ones are usually made with like cornstarch, potato starch, and if you look at them and you look at the little nutrient thing on the back, it'll be protein. It'll be either 0 grams or 1 gram. So that's another good snack food that you can just eat, right?
Just for a second, does gluten-free always mean it's your friend, or sometimes there's some gluten-frees that you got to watch out for?
Yeah, you do, right? So it's what you're really looking for. The gluten-free is like, oh, this is interesting. Let me look further into it. What you're really looking for is
okay. So we see gluten-free.
What you're looking for is gluten-free is like a okay, maybe this will work, and then you look, and what you want it to say is, instead of like you basically want it to say starch. You want to say potato starch, corn starch. Some gluten-free things are cassava flour. That's fine.
Rice flour or corn. Wait, stay away. Right.
Right. If it says rice flour or corn flour, then it's going to be higher in the branched-chain amino acids.
Okay, cool.
Or if it says, I don't know, buckwheat, or like, a lot of these gluten-free flours are things like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the different flours there.
Is Gatorade a good thing on this diet? Because it's got like cornstarch in it, dextrose, right, or something like that.
Is that what's in Gatorade? I don't know what's in Gatorade. But yeah, I mean, right. And so then, sure, you can do. So I'm not.
Candy.
I'm very on the shelf on sugar, right? Like, I'm not against sugar. I do think that. And this is maybe just for like historical reasons, like I say, like if I look around the world, what's a healthy culture? And I already said, and I've forgotten the name of the island in Japan where they eat sweet potatoes, Okinawa, right? Like that's an example of a very long-lived culture, and they lived on starch. And I don't see, when I look around the world, I don't see a lot of diets that are primarily eating sugar or fruit. All right. And so I like the idea of starch as the base of a diet. But partially, I think that is just because, like, if I eat pancakes for breakfast, I feel like I've eaten a real meal. If I eat fruit for breakfast, I kind of feel like, was that really a meal? Was that a snack? I don't know. So that's definitely part of it. And part of it is just that I don't see the traditional cultures eating sugar. So I like starch, but I'm not against sugar. So sure, so if you want to do, like you say, if you want to do a bag of, gluten-free pretzels and OJ, or maybe Gatorade, fine.
And then Smarties.
Even
those little Smarties candies,
right? Smarties, sure. Like they all, right? Those things are all. And one thing, actually, this is interesting. So a lot of candies, right? So the issue with sugar is really fructose, right? I'm not saying fructose is bad. Don't run out and say Brad said fructose is bad. It's just different. It's metabolized differently, right?
Right.
And so a lot of people think that the problem with like American soda is it's all made with high fructose corn syrup, and what happens is the fructose actually doesn't activate insulin, but it enters the cells kind of, and a lot of it goes into the liver.
Yeah.
And so it enters the cells kind of freely. It's not sort of gated by insulin. And so people have a lot of questions about that. I have questions about it, right? But if you eat, but an interesting thing about a lot of candies is they're actually made with corn syrup, right? And right. So here's a subtle thing. So if you see high fruit, so corn syrup is glucose. Corn syrup actually totally activates insulin. It's sweet and it's used in a lot of candies. High fructose corn syrup is sweeter than regular corn syrup. And so they made it, it's this whole chemical process you have to go through to get the corn to turn into fructose. And so they made that for the soda industry because they were trying to match the sweetness of traditional sugar, right? But most candy is just made out of corn syrup, and that means glucose. So I'm pretty in favor of candies that are made out of corn syrup. Gummy bears are the only ones that have the gelatin, which is really what you want, right? So that's why I say, well, you can get by just fine with pretzels and gluten-free pretzels and gummy bears. To me, that's a good, I mean, I literally had that 2 days ago as I needed a snack, and I was like, well, I just grabbed those at the gas station.
Do you hypothesize that you would have had the similar results you've had on this diet? You done only, these types of sugars rather than the starches you've done. Everything else is the same. You just change that one variable.
So it's hard to say. What I wonder is, and this is something I've wondered for a long time, and I don't have an answer. But this question of the glycemic index or the glycemic load, right? So one of the things about cassava, which I really like as a food, is that starch is very slowly absorbed. And so, it's like what I was saying when I gave myself the oral glucose tolerance test. You eat those pure glucose tablets and you get this big insulin spike, and then, your blood sugar crashes later. I don't think I would have had that same rise and crash if I'd have eaten 75 grams of starch from cassava, right? And so I guess, but having said that, I don't know, right? That I'm not sure. It's possible that eating pretzels and gummy bears is fine, right? Like I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other, I guess.
Okay. Anything else working class friendly? You're not a Michelin star chef, like
right. You're not a Michelin star chef. So one of the things you can do, right. So easy things are some of the brands of gluten-free pancake mix, right? I feel like people can make pancakes, right? There are a bunch of gluten-free pancake mixes like on Amazon. I wish I remembered the name of the brand, that if you look at them, they're mostly made with just starches, right? They're made with cassava flour. So these are easy things that people, like I say, if you just take that gluten-free mix, you put 1 egg in it and water, put it on the griddle. So I did get full disclosure, I did get a griddle that has a ceramic non-stick coating because I can cook pancakes on that with zero cooking oil. You don't need the cooking oil. It's so non-stick. You just pour the pancake batter on there. Boom, boom, boom.
Most
perfect
of the non-stick ones I have.
There's a whole bunch of them. They have them. These are, you can find these in Walmart, right? And so the old school non-stick, the Teflon, right? That's what it's called, Teflon. Teflon is not good for you. You don't want the Teflon. And so the cooking industry has gotten hip to this, and they've largely replaced the Teflon with like new generations of materials. And the ones that I like are the ceramic coated ones, but they have these in every Walmart. They're not hard to find, right? The one issue that I have with them, and this is I have an induction stove because I'm a chef and I love induction cooking. It's great. So for me, I have to find ones that are induction friendly, and most of them do not work on induction stoves. So that's only an issue if you have an induction stove. Most of the people probably don't. So for most people, this is not an issue.
Would you because of the fat and protein in an egg, would you encourage people to just eat one egg a day, max?
I wouldn't say one egg a day. So, the initial protocol that I outlined was 6 ounces of lean meat as a kind of high end. And in that video, I had a little chart of like equivalence. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I think 1 egg was the equivalent of 1 ounce of lean meat in terms of protein content and branched chain amino acid content. So maybe it was the equivalent of 2 ounces. So I would say I probably, I eat an egg, and honestly, at this point, eggs are like, I'm not really eating any muscle meats at this point, but I do eat eggs, and mostly the reason that I eat the eggs is that the pancake recipe just doesn't come out right without an egg in it, right? And so I eat the pancakes in the morning, I put an egg in there, and then the gnocchi is the same way. You really need the egg in the gnocchi for that to work. Or I might even try to make, there's this Fjordglut flour. You can make your own pasta at home recipe, but it's just starch and egg, right? That's how you make homemade pasta. So I might try that. And so the egg has really been my go-to source of complete protein, if you want to call it that. And I think eating, 3 eggs a day is fine, right? That's not going to put you over
3 eggs a day and 8 ounces of meat. Now you're too much, probably.
Yeah. See, you're getting more into, but what you can do is you can do 3 ounces of eggs, 3 eggs, and then all of the gelatin, collagen, pig's feet, beef tendon, baked pork rinds that you want, right? Those are all high protein foods. Unlimited, doesn't matter, because that's where you're getting your glycine, right? And the glycine those things are all low in branched chain amino acids, right? And I'm sort of, and the same with gummy bears, right? Gummy bears are made of gelatin, and so all of those are very low BCAA sources. And
what if you're vegan?
How
do you get glycine?
Well, that's a problem. I don't have an answer for that.
I don't vegan source for glycine.
I don't know of any good vegan source of glycine. Maybe there's one I don't know about. I just don't know
cucumber? Of it. Is that an animal?
Is that vegan? I don't know. I'm not sure.
I'm trying to think of something to help the vegans out if they need, because I want them to have their gelatin too.
No, I agree. I'm not anti-vegan.
Hey, there you go. That's what we got to do. We're going to create a tech startup. Vegan
glycine.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe there is something out there for the vegans. I don't know what it is off the top. I don't know. Like, does fruit pectin have glycine in it? I should look that up. That's an interesting question. Jelly, right, is made out of fruit pectin, which is another. It's similar to like gelatin, but it comes from apples, or whatever. It comes from fruit pectin. So I should look up what the composition of pectin is. That's a good question.
I know Ray Pete discourages pectin. He doesn't like pectin.
He doesn't like pectin. I didn't know that.
He doesn't like the starchy fruits that are not ripened. He says, but see, that's the one thing you guys are a little bit different on. He's really leans on the sugar. You lean on the starch. That's about the difference. That's the only difference between the two things.
It is. Yeah. We're pretty similar. There's a few other differences, but
the starch really are more obesogenic, and that's probably, you would say maybe it's the branched chain amino acids, but I'm sure he knew about those very well too.
Well, right, and that's interesting because if you think about most people, right, if you say starch, they're thinking corn, they're thinking rice, they're thinking wheat, right, or potatoes. And all of those things are high in the branched chain amino acids. And so the sort of difference, the difference in my thinking in Ray Pete's, and I don't know if Ray Pete, he does talk about pro-inflammatory amino acids. I haven't actually read all of his, I haven't actually read most of his stuff, to be honest with you. I understand that we've developed our diet along very parallel paths, but I don't actually know. I'm not actually familiar with most of his writing, so I don't know what he said. But I did watch a video the other day about a guy explaining the Ray Peat philosophy, and he did talk about quote unquote pro-inflammatory amino acids, which is interesting because I'm supplementing with cysteine, And Ray Peat didn't like cysteine, and I don't really know why. Right. And so that's the reason for the cysteine. Let's just real quick. I'm taking N-acetylcysteine, NAC, and glycine and cysteine together make glutathione, which is one of the body's primary antioxidants. And so it's good to have healthy levels of glutathione. So out of all of the quote unquote essential amino acids, the one that I'm supplementing is cysteine, right? That's the one that I'm sort of worried about not having enough of.
Yeah.
And it might be that, it's possible that I'm worried about that unnecessarily. But what I'll say is that if you look at human clinical trials where they give people N-acetylcysteine and glycine together, right? So that's a popular supplement combination. The results of that supplementation are off the charts. Great. I mean, they're fantastic, right? So that is one other supplement that I would recommend is N-acetylcysteine. It's you can't really argue with the results of that one. Anyway, but what was I saying? I was talking about Ray Peat and So, but you could look at what I'm talking about and look at what Ray Peat would have said and say, well, maybe one of the primary differences is I'm saying eat the starch, but don't eat the normal starches, eat the purified starches. An interesting thing about that is when you look at humans, I should update this video. I did a video about the history of tubers, right? Humans and tubers, right? So the first humans were roasting tubers. We have evidence. We found the tubers of humans roasting tubers in caves in South Africa 160,000 years ago, right? So 160,000 years ago, the first Homo sapiens were in a cave in South Africa roasting these tubers, which are very plentiful, interestingly, in South Africa. And so there's all these flowers, right? You get bulbs, right? You plant flower bulbs, right? And those are just tubers and they're full of starch. And they're actually most of them are pretty high quality. Like they're not very fibrous. They're very high in starch. They're very low protein. They're kind of, right? What I'm describing on this diet was actually humans have been eating for 160,000 years. Then humans get to Europe and I think 40,000 or 60,000 years ago, we have evidence of humans collecting cattail tubers. And so cattail tubers are more of a fibrous tuber, but what happens, the starch are like these little granules. And you can see videos of guys doing this on YouTube. You take a cattail tuber and you just mash it up and you put it in water and the starch granules just separate out, and then you throw out the fiber and you're left with literally purified starch. And like humans were doing this in Europe 40,000 years ago, right? Well, 30,000 years before the dawn of agriculture, humans were purifying starch out of cattail tubers, right? And so sometimes when I talk about like eating, I'm like, no, don't eat wheat, eat purified wheat starch, right? That sounds like it sounds a little crazy, right? But then you look back at human history and go, actually, humans have been purifying starches since forever, So I think that's a cool way to think about it. Do you
eat sweet potatoes? Can you people eat sweet potatoes? Let's go back to more common.
Yeah, so sweet potato, right? So right. So if we do this hierarchy, right, of things with the best sources of starches with low BCAAs, so the best ones tend to be tropical tubers, cassava, yam, and also plantain, right? A lot of people like plantain.
I have a theory about it. Here's my theory again.
Okay.
Remember the weird theory I keep jumping on top of your thing with? But you say that when you eat the PUFA, right, it's cold water fish, cold water plants.
Right.
Telling you winter's coming. And I added to your part saying, well, what if when you eat those tropical oils like coconut oil and those other oils in the tropics, it's an environmental signal to your body that it's hot as hell here. Please do not store on any fat, any extra fat. You know, we
Right.
we don't have no winter here. And so,
Well,
what if the tubers?
it
What if the
could be.
tropical tubers are doing the same thing? Like it's a single.
It it could be. And when you think about it,
That's so cool.
you know, yeah, right. It could well be, right? And so the tropical thing, yeah, the tropical starches for whatever reason, and maybe that's exactly it, are lower in the BCAAs. And so,
But what if?
yeah,
But what if like you're messing up your body? Like if you're a Nordic blooded, you know, like Northern European person, and you're trying to like, you know, flood your body with tropical oils and tropical starches. Like, is there any way that might, like, you know how they always said eat to your? I know I'm going off for something, but a lot of people think like this. They lecture me, you know, when I go on other people's shows, you know, say, no, that's you got to eat to your genetics or something.
So, you know, so I'm an evolutionary biologist, right? And so I go way back. I'm like, well, you know, well, like in my thinking, right, I assume that a modern human, our metabolism runs essentially the same as like the first proto mammal 250 million years ago, right? And so I'm like, it's probably most like, sure, like we make small adaptations here and there, but the overall system design probably worked the same in the first mammal as it works now, right? We've just made little adaptations to it. Is kind of the way I think about it, right? And so I'm not as worried about that issue, I guess, is what I would say. Right. And so then sweet potatoes are interesting. So sweet potatoes, fun fact, were domesticated in Mexico by, you know, the pre-Columbian Mexicans, obviously. And so that's surprising to a lot of people because they think it's from Japan or something. But no, they're actually from Mexico. So it's a semi-tropical tuber. And like the other tropical tubers, it is lower in... It's kind of in the middle. It's like, it's halfway between cassava and potato in terms of its branched chain amino acid content, but it's a good one. If you like sweet potatoes, I'm all for it.
What about sweet potatoes?
So yams are good. So right, another confusion in America, like I can go into my local grocery store and buy a can of quote unquote yams, right, which are actually sweet potatoes. They're not actually yams. Yam is is another tuber.
Is it better than sweet potato?
Is native to Asia and Africa, and it actually is even lower. It's like the cassava. It's very low. It's lower in branched chain amino acids than sweet potatoes. So yeah, eat all the yams you want. Although actual real yams are not super easy to find in the U.S. And we also have in my I go to Buffalo, and the Tops is a grocery chain in upstate New York, and so the Tops that I usually go to is in a Latino area, and so you go and they have like 10 different kinds of tropical tubers, and I don't even know, like Name, Name. Maybe it's I don't actually know if it's pronounced Name or name, but name seems like a weird thing to call it, and they have coco mas. That I don't have that right. There's like 10 different kinds of tubers that I don't know what any of them are, but it's always fun to look at them. And sometimes I'll buy one and try it, but I don't know what I'm doing with it. Right. And probably any of those are fine. They have them in downtown Buffalo.
Tuber is probably okay.
That's my guess. Yeah. Yeah.
And breadfruit, which is not a tuber, but it's a tropical thing, is probably similarly low in branched chain.
Yeah. Breadfruit. Right. Breadfruit is another good one. Yeah, totally. Here's a fun thing that I want to try making. It sounds super easy. This is like a staple food in West Africa, and I'm forgetting the name, but they fufu they call it. And so you take you boil cassava and green plantain. I think it's just equal amounts of both. You boil them, and then you just throw them in a food processor, and you just blend them. And it makes this kind of like they call it hand food. So what they do is they make their sauce, and then the fufu, I guess, doesn't stick to your hands. So you just take a ball of fufu and you use it. Like if you've ever been to an Ethiopian restaurant and they have the pancake, and you pick up the sauce of the pancake. So they do the same thing with the fufu, which is just a cassava and green plantain blended together. And you use that to pick up whatever sauce, I could probably use it to pick up the my marinara sauce and beef tendon that I have bubbling over there.
So you can also, well, we're going to wrap it up because I know this has been a long time going, and you need to get back to your experimentation.
Right. I need to go eat my gnocchi.
Yeah. What about you do a lot of noodles, glass noodles, so that's like sweet potato.
Yeah, right.
Noodles.
Right. The glass noodles. Just say so. Glass noodles are these are eaten all over Asia, very common, and they're made with purified starch. So some of them are made with sweet potato starch, and there's another one made out of, I think it's mung bean starch. And these are really easy to find. Like if I go to the Asian store in Ithaca, there's like 20 different kinds of glass noodles, but they have them in Wegmans, which is like also the local grocery store. There's a Wegmans brand glass noodles, and sometimes they're called cellophane noodles, and they're clear. They're clear when you boil them. So, so those are 0 BCAA, and they make like spring rolls, have those clear noodles that are inside of a spring roll. That's another one. You can make spring rolls. Spring roll wrappers are made out of tapioca, like pure tapioca starch, or some of them are. So that's another. You could literally do spring rolls with glass noodles inside, and that's something you can get at a restaurant too. Like my housemate came home the other day, and she had a bowl of it was a glass noodle pho or some kind of, I think it was a pho. It was a soup, right? It was broth and glass noodles that she'd gotten at an Asian restaurant downtown. So if you're thinking about options that you can buy at a restaurant,
but not rice noodles.
The rice noodles are not as good. I mean, and look, obviously, I'm like taking a very purist view of this. If you eat rice noodles, eat rice noodles once a day, or a couple of times a week, it's not going to throw you off. In the same way that, I play basketball on Wednesday nights, and we go to the local place and we get burritos, right? And I do that once a week, right? Once a week is not going to throw you off, right? And it's a beef burrito, so there's it's wheat, it's rice, it's black beans, it's beef. All of these things have branched chain amino acids, but it's one time a week, and I do it right after I worked out, so it's fine, right? So obviously there's a level of purity is always how hardcore do you want to be about anything, right?
How many some people BCAAs would you get in a bowl of rice noodle pho? Probably a big bowl of
it. Good, right? So if we think like from the noodles, right? So rice, interestingly, rice is pretty low in protein. I said 8% before. I think that's pretty close. It's 7 or 8%. But out of all of the proteins, rice is super high in branched chain amino acids. I think it's like close to 20%, and like some of the other ones are more like 16%. Rice is like 19 or 20%, so it's very high. So if you got a big bowl of noodles and it's let's say it's 600 calories of noodles or 800 calories of noodles, if it's a really big bowl of noodles. 800 calories is a lot of noodles. 800, doing math in my head, 8% protein. So that's like, that's only 8 grams of protein. Did I do that right? I don't know. I've lost track. 30. No, it's higher than that. Well, I've lost the math, but you're probably looking at 3 or 4 grams of branched chain amino acids is my guess, which is like half your day's requirement, right? I think that's pretty close to accurate, and that's half what I'm trying to get in a whole day, which is why I don't eat big bowls of rice noodles, right? Because I would rather use that branched chain amino acid on something like eggs, right? Which are very nutritious, right? Eggs are full of vitamins and all kinds of good stuff. So like if I would just rather not use the BCAAs on rice, I'd rather use it on eggs, I guess.
It's smart for people to hear that walking through that economy of use of these things.
Right.
You're saying 3,000 calories. Like what else are you? I mean, I know you're making a lot of big meals, but again, if you're someone that's not really cooking elaborate things, and it's not elaborate for you, but it's elaborate for people who are not chef friendly.
Right. Well, so
what do you get the rest of your calories in besides the pancakes and a giant bowl of glass noodles and a little bit of egg, you know what I mean? Like,
right. So, but that already puts you at, the glass noodle meal in the morning is 1,000 calories. The
And that's
I
noodles
I
calories, or you put other like vegetables, broccoli, mushrooms, all that stuff in there.
oh yeah, I mean I eat all that stuff. Like I say, like I'm so like this my afternoon. So I've been doing kind of like two big meals a day. I do the pancakes first thing in the morning. I usually eat the second meal around 4 or 5 p.m. Today my schedule's a little off, but it's fine. Um, and so uh, like the afternoon meal that I'm having today, right? It's a big bowl of marinara sauce. It's beef tendon. It's that gnocchi, which has egg and flour and cassava in it, whole cassava. So it's essentially it's mostly a whole food meal, right? There's I've got onions in there. I got full on like marinara sauce with I could throw mushrooms in there. I got no problem with throwing mushrooms or peppers, onions, garlic, all that stuff can go in there, right? That's all fine. That's not. I also sometimes will just have a in the middle of the day, if I'm just feeling like I want something, I'll just do a big bowl of greens. I have this like fat-free Italian dressing that I get at the local grocery store, and I just have greens and fat-free dressing, right, just to fill the stomach, or I'll snack
Does
on
it have
apples.
seed oils
Like,
in it? Or no, I guess it's fat free.
no, it's fat-free, so there's no seed oils in it, and or I'll just eat apples in the afternoon, right, if I'm getting a little peckish between meals, right? So I'm eating vegetables regularly. I'm eating a lot of greens. I'm eating apples. I'm eating marinara. I'm eating, whatever. I do pizza. Like, so the other day I used that Fjordglut flour and I made pizzas, and I put, and again, so then it's like, all right, if I'm doing pizza, I measured out, I weighed out 3 ounces of mozzarella and I put it on there. And I said, okay, well, that's my, between the egg that I had this morning and my pancakes and this 3 ounces of mozzarella, that's kind of um, my branched chain amino acid budget for the day, right?
And your fat budget. What about your fat budget? You said it's like 30 grams.
Right, it's like 30 grams, right? And so that mozzarella and the egg is the fat and the BCAAs, and I ate it with head cheese. I put head cheese on it. I really like head cheese. This is the head cheese is like a gelatin. They used to have it in the local grocery store, but they don't have it anymore. You could get it thin sliced, which is awesome. I love it. It's like a lunch meat. It's like bologna, but it's like a rubbery bologna. It's just made out of gelatin, and they put like pig snouts and pig's ears in there, but it's chopped. Usually it's chopped up fine, so it's just kind of like it's sort of like a mortadella almost, but it's full of gelatin. So like if you want so if you're thinking about easy sources of gelatin, if you're in a supermarket, see if they've got head cheese in the deli section. Boar's Head makes head cheese. Right. This is another good source of gelatin that you can find out and about.
Milk? Is milk high in branched chain amino acids?
Milk is high in branched chain amino acids. So unfortunately, I love milk, but I'm not doing milk at the moment. And like I say, I hope that someday I get my ability to break down branched chain amino acids again, and I can have milk and milk and meat.
How will you know how will you know when you're able to do that? Is there a way to measure that?
We'll just have to try it and see what happens, I guess. Brad, feel like I'm ready.
You've gone through a marathon of questioning I've got for you, so you've done well and you're looking good. So best of luck in your endeavors to keep going with this, man. I'm really proud of you.
Thank you. Yeah, we're gonna see what happens.
Relentless in trying to figure this out. So
yeah, I'm very energized about this. I really feel like there's something here, right? When I stopped eating the BCAAs and I saw my blood glucose drop, I was like, okay, there's something to this, right? This is real. And like I said, I had done almost the same diet 2 months before, and I didn't get that same response from it. Same supplements, same everything, pretty much. The only thing that really changed was the branched chain amino acids and the glycine. So that's when I kind of knew. I was like, okay, this is something real. The scale followed along. I lost 14 pounds last month. I lost another pound, 1.3 pounds yesterday. And today I was back up a little, like a half pound, but I'm still pounds below what I even was at the end of October.
Was there something you did? Was there something you changed in a variable that maybe it caused an increase?
No, my weight is right. I assume this happens with
Yeah,
everybody. My weight
yeah,
is like a, it fluctuates up and down, but the trend is still down.
it's good. Do you
It's probably
sleep better?
just,
Do you noticed any other benefits besides better
well,
insulin?
I will say that this time of year is always a struggle for me sleep wise. So I get insomnia between about October 15th and Thanksgiving every
Why?
year. I think it just has to do with the shortening days and like my body's response to daylight. And sure, probably, I don't know. I don't know why, but historically,
Horoscope, astrology?
yeah. And then the day length stabilizes through winter, and uh my sleep schedule is fine again. And then the same thing happens in like March when the days get long again. I get insomnia again. So I don't know what it is about this time of year. Um, so it hasn't completely fixed my insomnia, but yeah, I guess that's,
The sleep is a very important variable if you want to be metabolically healthy, right?
well, it is, but it certainly is tied in with all these things. Your circadian rhythms and your PPAR alpha is right. I talk about PPAR alpha a lot, and I talk about the aryl hydrocarbon receptor. Those two things are both completely tied in with your circadian rhythm, and they're both triggered by changing day length. And like that's right, because that's part of the hibernation programming in an animal is you reduce the day length, and that makes them hibernate, and it's all tied in with so PPAR alpha and aryl hydrocarbon receptor go up in the morning when you wake up. They're controlled opposite of your, the clock gene controls your daily oscillation. And yeah, and PPAR alpha and the aryl hydrocarbon receptor are high in the day, and then they go down at night. And so these are the things that are involved in fat metabolism and insulin resistance and all this stuff, right? Yeah, so it is all tied together somehow, and obviously, it's hard to unpack it sometimes. I suppose that if humans evolved in the tropics, at first we didn't have to deal with these big day length cycles at all. I live in New York State, so it's pretty dramatic difference in day length between fall and spring. Um, yeah, so I don't know. It's another fun topic to think about, but
Yeah.
I don't have the answer on that one.
For a quick overview, if you're interested in trying his diet, go to fireinabottle.net or any of his other
Yeah,
social.
fire in a bottle on this. I would say go to my YouTube channel. Is I do a lot of stuff on YouTube these days. So go to YouTube and Google for Fire in a Bottle. There's a lot of up to date videos on that. But you can go to fireinabottle.net and there's links to the YouTube videos. On Twitter, I'm fire_bottle. I think on Instagram, I'm fire_in-a-bottle. I'm not super great about keeping up to date on my Instagram feed, but I'm trying to get better. So
do you have a low BCAA meat special at your Firebrand Meats shop?
I'm not there yet. I would love to do something with like baked pork rinds or some of these other things, but
yeah, that's another problem for the average. Another problem for the average Joe is that a lot of their pork rinds are fried either in a seed oil or some of them will say like fried in pork fat, which you probably should avoid on this particular diet you're doing.
Yeah, I mean,
it's fried in its own pork fat. What do you do?
It's. I think if it fits the pork rinds that are fried in pork fat that are higher in fat than the baked pork rinds, which I prefer. Just think about how that fits into your sort of daily fat budget, right? And I'm also not sure. And so people also ask me all the time, and they say, well, in the mouse studies on the high fat diet, if you just restrict the isoleucine, the mice get lean. So maybe the fat composition of the diet isn't as important if you fix the branched chain amino acid problem, and that may well be true. For me, I'm doing low fat and low BCAA, and it's working. So I'm not very motivated to change it, right? Right. So I would say it's the same thing like with the mozzarella cheese, right? It's like I put if I want to do pizza, I'll put 3 ounces of mozzarella cheese on there, and there's some fat in there, and there's some BCAAs in there, but within the context of the day, it's fine. And so, I think the same with those fried, like pork rinds fried in lard. I would say don't go crazy on them, but if you want to have, some of those as a snack or as part of a meal, knock yourself out. There's a famous dish, called I think it's called yuca con chicharron, right? This is in Latin America. It's literally just boiled. It's boiled yuca or cassava, and it's served with pork rinds. And literally, that's the dish, right? And so that's a very I love that when there are, these kind of regional, traditional dishes that kind of match, right, what we're doing. Here's another fun one, actually. So fish balls, which you have in Asian restaurants, but in an American grocery market, like the imitation lobster meat, are made the same way. They take a little bit of fish, and then they add like starch, like cornstarch and water, and you're essentially, right. Fish balls come from countries that historically didn't have a lot of protein, right? And so you're essentially stretching the protein, right? You're adding water and starch, and you make this ball.
Imitation crab meat,
imitation crab meat, and imitation lobster. So the imitation lobster I got last week was like, I think a 3-ounce portion had 6 grams of protein, right? So if you were to eat like 6 ounces of chicken breast, I think you'd get something like 15, I think maybe 20, I think you'd maybe get 20 grams of protein in 3 ounces of chicken breast. But if you eat 3 ounces of imitation crab, you get 6 grams. So that's a fun kind of if you really just need more meat in your diet, that's a way to do it. Use imitation lobster or imitation crab meat as a way to kind of stretch out that portion of things. Also, weird one, that's lower than a lot of other sources, I'll say, is scallops. Also, beef tripe.
The beef tripe is another kind of connective. What?
Beef tripe is another kind of connective tissue that's a little bit lower than skeletal muscles and branched chain amino acids. It's kind of like halfway in the middle, But so, yeah, scallops, beef tripe, imitation lobster, these are things that you can cheat a little more heavily with.
But avoid cheeses in general, right? Because too much BCAAs there? Or except for...
Yeah, I think so. But like I say, if you want to eat 3 ounces, that's fine. Yeah. Just don't overdo it.
And so no dairy products in general are saying, well, you said like light sour cream you have, stuff like that.
Yeah, light sour cream I like a lot because it's probably surprisingly low in fat and calories and protein and BCAAs, but it adds a lot of flavor. A couple of tablespoons of sour cream can go a long way to make something, really tasty.
Are there low fat cheeses that also do the same thing with low protein, like Parmesan or something? Or I don't know.
I mean, I think the low fat cheeses probably tend to be higher in the branched chain amino acids in general. Something like cream cheese is going to be low in branched chain amino acids. It's obviously going to be higher. Cream cheese is obviously pretty high in fat. But that's one that I've actually thought about. I was like, because dairy fat is, I think, of the best quality. So I think, sure, if you want to do a cheat and do a higher fat version of this diet, I would say, yeah, cream cheese is probably a good option if you really want some cheese.
Yeah. Well, Brad, it's been a great time talking with you, and I want to let you go. So again, fireinaBottle.net or your YouTube channel, Fire in a Bottle on YouTube, is the best place people can find you.
Yep. Thanks for having me, David. It's a lot of fun, and it's good times. And I'm, like I say, I'm feeling energized right now. Things are good. So, thanks for having me on.
Well, we're cheering you on. We're excited to see what happens next. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Take care. All